Hello and welcome to the Election Show. I'm your host, Dr. Christina Greer, Associate Professor of Political Science at Fordham University. And joining me today, as always, via Zoom is Matt McDermott, Communication Strategist and Vice President of Whitman Insight Strategies. And also with us today is political analyst and Professor of Political Science at Columbia University, Lincoln Mitchell. Hello, gentlemen.
To see you.
How are we doing?
It is a new day. We have survived an inauguration. We now have 46th President of the United States, Joe Biden, 49th Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. So in the inauguration, we saw Amanda Gorman, who brought back Black Girl Magic and delivered some really thoughtful words in her poem. Obviously, VP Harris meant a lot to a lot of people. The first Black woman, the first Asian American woman. She's a child of immigrants. She's from the West Coast, Lincoln, as a Democrat. She went to an HBCU. She represents the Divine Nine. She's got a blended family. We now have our first, second gentleman. And so Joe Biden talked about his vision for America. This is where the moment seems to have found someone who has a deep well of compassion for the American people. We know that he's suffered great loss. He's lost 2 children and a wife. And so this moment where so many Americans are grieving due to the coronavirus, it seems as though Joe Biden is the man for the moment to actually help us process some of these really sad emotions as we move through healing, literally and figuratively, as a nation. We also know that there was a heavy security presence, 25,000 members of the National Guard. Some were vetted because they might be white supremacists, so that was a touch stressful as we had so many people gather. It should be noted that the former presidents, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama were all in attendance. But obviously, we know one of the most glaring omissions was the fact that Donald Trump and Melania chose not to attend. They left Washington, D.C. at 8 in the morning, but Vice President Pence was there as the representation of the Trump era. So that was a noticeable omission, but also for many Democrats, especially a signal that our long national 4-year nightmare is over and Donald Trump might be erased from this visage of presidential leadership. Matt, I'll start with you. Inauguration. I know that you've been very excited about a Biden-Harris administration and what that means, not just descriptively, but also substantively. So how are you feeling with the inauguration on Wednesday, January 20th?
Well, first, doesn't it just feel good to be able to breathe a sigh of relief?
I'm still coming down. I'm not fully there yet. I think my body has been so tight for 4 years. I think a lot of people are realizing the amount of abuse that we've all suffered. It's taking a while for us to actually release.
And acclimate to our new reality. And I hope, we very quickly appreciate what we were able to accomplish because it was immense. And the amount of energy, the amount of really work from the grassroots up over 3 years to get us to this day is immeasurable. The people who protested, the people who wrote letters, the people who knocked on doors, the people that went up to the Capitol to make their voice heard, all of that has led to this day, and everyone should feel like they were a part of making this happen. And now the exciting work begins. And I think what has excited me most in the last few days since the inauguration is a real commitment from Democrats, both now in the White House and in our Congress, to get stuff done. And my concern, as we've talked about many times heading into this inauguration and this transition, is that Democrats wouldn't have learned the appropriate lessons from the past 4 years and would be stuck in the mud in a similar way that former President Obama was in 2009 when he took office, and really not understanding the mandate that Democrats were just given to govern. I am excited because I think we've seen early hints, particularly out of Congress in the past day or two, a willingness to do what we can with our majority to affect change for the American people. Mitch McConnell is going to do everything he can to muddy up this new presidency and try to prevent this president from having the mandate that the American people have given him. And luckily, I think we've seen indications from leadership in the Senate among Democrats that that's not going to happen. That if that is the road Republicans choose to go down, we will get rid of the filibuster. We will get rid of the sort of preventative measures that allow Democrats to get their agenda passed, which is exactly what needs to happen. The American people need help now more than ever before. And Democrats will not be rewarded with future electoral wins if we don't use this moment to enact real, meaningful structural changes on everything from healthcare to democracy reforms to overcoming this pandemic, to really sort of stabilizing the economy and building back some mechanism of equality in it. There is so much to get done. And I hope after we get through the celebrations of this week and sort of have a nice, much needed sleep this weekend, everyone is rested and ready to go on Monday, because there's so much that needs to be done, including holding members of the former administration accountable for their criminal actions.
Yeah, and so we'll get to what these next steps look like. Lincoln, I want to bring you in and get your thoughts on the inauguration. I mean, you've swiftly become my favorite West Coast person, even though you're on the East Coast. I feel like you're just pretending. California is clearly in your heart. So every time I see Kamala Harris, the three of us have been talking about this race for so long. We've been talking about the Biden-Harris, future administration for months now. So whenever I see Kamala Harris, I think of Lincoln Mitchell.
Well,
what were you feeling?
The man from San Fran.
I'm very flattered that when you think of Kamala Harris, you think of me.
When I think of the Vice President of the United States, I think of Lincoln Mitchell. But there's a direct thoroughfare, and you've given us and our viewers a lot to think about the importance of East Coast and West Coast representation when we try and combat not just the coronavirus and sort of these economic uncertainties, but just a blanket policy perspective. So what were you feeling as you watched the inauguration of Joe Biden as the 46th president, but also Kamala Harris and her blended family as the 49th vice president?
Well, I was very impressed with Kamala Harris and her blended family. A couple of things I was thinking as I watched that, and this is very personal. I tweeted at Doug Emhoff, and I said, if Ella is single and would like to meet a nice, tall Jewish guy who's very smart and clever, my son is also single. I haven't heard back from him about that. But that is significant. I mean, early in the Trump administration, racist, pro-Confederate neo-Nazis marched in Charlottesville and they chanted, "Jews will not replace us." And you know what? Tell that to Karen Pence. So that was one thought that came to me. Another thought that came to me, which is perhaps on another thought was this. Like I assume both of you, I spent that day tweeting, texting with friends, calling friends and family. And I spoke to a lot of people, interacted with a lot of people on social media. And no one said to me, gee, this inauguration would be better if Donald Trump were on stage. So he gave that bitter, gloating speech. This deeply anti-gay administration closed with a gay anthem, which I thought was just, too good to be true. But then another thought, and this is an important one. This is actually a serious one. Biden in his speech said, democracy has prevailed. And that sentiment and that phrase was picked up by the media. But democracy, if a democracy depends on one party winning, it's not a democracy. If our democracy, let's be very clear, we should all understand this. If the Democrats lose control of the House in 2022, on January 10th or whatever of 2023, they will begin impeaching Biden. Don't ask for what, it doesn't matter for what, right? A third of the country still thinks what happened on January 6th of this year is okay. So while I was very happy to see the inauguration, I was very happy to see an America that looks more like the America I know. And we should also put a global perspective on this. The inauguration of Joe Biden was an effort by the United States to show its soft power to the world once again, that we are a country that can do something, that we are a country that can recover from that attack on our Capitol on January 6th and run a beautiful, peaceful, big and moving and safe transition. So that mattered too. But we are not out of the woods with regards to American democracy. We still have a lot of work to do to build and rebuild our democratic systems. And just because Donald Trump is now in Florida fighting off legal challenges and eating well-done steaks with ketchup doesn't mean it's over yet.
Right. I mean, I thought the visual of being on the steps of the Capitol were the beautiful flags, and obviously the outfits were amazing, and that was a lot of my texting during the inauguration. And I was wearing plum, just like Michelle Obama, so I felt very connected to what was going on. But it was also the scene of what had just happened on January 6th, the very same location where we saw the Confederate flags, where we saw swastikas, where we saw people urinating and defecating in our Capitol building and on our Capitol building. So the juxtaposition of what this country is, it's both and. Right. I think so many people see it as a dichotomous relationship of like, we are not this, we are this. And it's like, no, we are actually all of these things. We can have a Stacey Abrams, Georgia victory in the morning of an African-American senator and a Jewish senator from the state of Georgia. And in the afternoon, we can see Confederate flags and swastikas flying in the Capitol. I think those two things are both America, and we have to be honest about that as well. Yep. And so, Matt, you alluded to sort of Biden and Harris coming in and hitting the ground running. I mean, so far, I've already seen people like, what's Biden going to do? And I'm like, slow down. He literally has been in work one full day. He has to figure out all of the mess that he has inherited. We know that criminals tend not to leave a lot of paper trails. So there are many protocols that weren't followed. There's so many receipts that Joe Biden just doesn't have to sort of figure out what needs to be done, what needs to be undone, and what wasn't done. And so as he's trying to confirm members of his cabinet with a Senate that is a very slim margin, as he's trying to fight COVID, as he's trying to articulate the importance of a vaccine, we see Dr. Fauci in his full Brooklyn happiness, finally, because he can be a scientist again and doesn't have to deal with the emotional winds of a president. But also as he's thinking about getting the economy back on track and dealing with the fact that a third of the country still believes in white supremacy, doesn't believe that he was rightfully elected, and possibly will be planning to do something quite dangerous in the near future. What do you think the next 10 days or the next 1 month? Lots of people want to say, well, 100 days. We don't really have 100 days in that sense, because we know Joe Biden is really only working with 2 years of a Democratic unified government, realistically. We don't know what's going to happen in 2 years, but let's just assume he loses either the House or the Senate or both. But we also know that after like 9 or 10 months, people will be running for re-election. So that gets a little skeptical as far as building coalitions, even with people within your own party, but especially with Republicans. So what does the next 10 days or the next month really look like for a Biden-Harris administration? And what do both of them do, not just domestically, but also internationally, since we've been so far out of the mix? The Paris Climate Accord is just one instance.
If there was ever a time to walk and chew gum, now is the moment, because the work that needs to be done is really immeasurable. And I think we knew going into this transition, legislatively, there's a lot that needs to be done. Globally, there's a lot to be done to rebuild America's presence around the world, given the allies and those relationships that we have so tarnished under the Trump years. There's immeasurable work that needs to be done there. And I think what we're starting to see is also the work that now needs to be done rebuilding the civil class in our federal government, which has been decimated under the Trump administration. And it's pretty evident that our federal government cannot function at 100% without rebuilding structurally that civil servant class in our government. I mean, you saw over the past day or so, you had mentioned Dr. Fauci. I mean, it now seems evident that there literally has been no federal COVID response plan in existence for the past 11 months. I think this incoming administration expected the worst and came in with something that was even more palpably terrible than what they were expecting. I mean, it basically sounds like the federal government has no plan whatsoever in terms of how to get vaccines out to the American people. It sounds like the situation on production of those vaccines is even worse than we could have possibly imagined. And that is going to take a huge effort of the collective federal government, including using the Defense Production Act, to get that system in place to be able to get the American people vaccinated against the pandemic that is killing our citizens. And so that is obviously going to be the biggest priority. I think secondarily, there is going to need to be a huge effort among the Congress to pass a number of pieces of legislation in a very expedited amount of time. They need to use the time they have advantage to them to get this done. Most immediately, it's going to be the COVID package. And it sounds like there is an avenue there to get something pretty substantial passed in the next few weeks. And then once that's done, I think the attention really needs to turn to our democracy because it has been dismantled under the Trump administration. And to your point, Democrats don't have a lot of time to act. And if we don't get those democracy reform passed quickly and in place quickly, and we lose those majorities in Congress next year, there is no rebuilding this. I mean, this is our one moment to get voting rights through, to repass the VRA, to, I think, use the DOJ to more effectively deal with issues of race in this country. And frankly, to also ensure that all of our citizens, including those in places like Washington, D.C., have representation in Congress and statehood. There is a lot that needs to get done. And there is no time to waste because, to your point, there is an election next year. And Democrats have a very limited window to fundamentally reform this country to ensure that the past 4 years can never happen again.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key, right? I mean, it can happen again, and it can happen with someone
And it will
who's
happen again.
much more polished and slightly, you and Lincoln have said this for months now, someone who's more polished, someone who's more intelligent than a Donald Trump, but still the same exact ethos, ideology, and motivating factors for the sort of bowels of this nation. Lincoln, what are you looking for in the next 10 days, the next month, per se? I mean, obviously, COVID, obviously the vaccine. So many people are posting stories about needing and wanting their parents to get the vaccine so that they can at least visit them, feel safe that their parents can go to the grocery store. As Matt mentioned, there has been no plan. And I think we all knew that, but to see that there is no plan lets us know that we've literally been flying blind with a maniac at the driver's seat. That's no longer the case. What do you think we'll see in the next 10 days, in the next 1 month from the Biden-Harris administration?
Well, what I'm going to talk about is COVID because that's central to your question. On the day of the inauguration, 4,200 Americans died of COVID. On the eve of the inauguration, the new now president and vice president held a memorial service, which was extraordinary. One of the reasons it was extraordinary because Donald Trump never bothered to do that. And when we say we made it, we should just take a moment and recognize not all of us did. Many of us lost people who we loved, who we cared about, who were big parts of our lives. Many, many families are wrestling with that, even as we breathe this sigh of relief. And the reason I say this is not just because it's important on its own, but because Joe Biden, he's now been president for roughly 48 hours. And he's a lot of time ahead of him, but I think it's safe to say he didn't get elected president to attend parties and play golf. He got elected president so he could get to work, and he got to work right away. And he's already, as far as I can see, trying to take on these problems very seriously. So he gets a lot of credit for that. What will determine the success of this administration is whether they can get these vaccines out as fast as possible. He's laid out a goal of 100 million vaccines in 100 days. Double that. If you make it 200 million in 200 days, I'm not getting my vaccine till late July, which is better than not getting it at all and better than getting it in December. But he's got to accelerate the vaccinations and then do the economic support for the people who are struggling. I like that he extended the ban on evictions. Evicting someone in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of winter, should not be legal, full stop. And he at least put that off. So I give him, that's a good thing. But if he is able to solve those two problems, he will become more popular. It will give energy and strength to the democracy agenda, which Matt has outlined, which is extremely important. And my role in life and on this show is to be negative and cynical, and I understand that and I embrace that. But I just want to raise an alternate scenario here. What if he is able, through the work he's doing now, to get the vaccine out there faster? And what if by September 1st, colleges, universities, and most importantly, K through 12 schools are pretty much back to normal? And because of that, people who have been stuck at home and have money, because they were fortunate to be able to work at home, are taking trips, are going to restaurants, are staying in hotels. The economy is getting strong. That's not a terrible scenario to be going into the year of the midterm election. Now, the problem is, if the three of us can figure that out, so can Mitch McConnell and so can Kevin McCarthy. And once again, as was the case when Donald Trump was president, the success of their party is linked to killing Americans quicker. And we should be very clear about the language we use here. And I use that language deliberately. If they try to stop a program of accelerating vaccinations, it's because they want more Americans to die. If they try to stop, if suddenly Republicans get very concerned about balancing budgets and fiscal prudence, and that's because they want Americans to be thrown out of their homes into the cold in the middle of the pandemic. But that's what they will likely do. And what President Biden, we've spoken a lot about his compassion and his sensitivity and his temperament, he's not new to politics either. And my hope is that he is willing to play hardball because the president of the United States has some power, and Mitch McConnell might want to think about that before he thinks he's the tough guy in the room. He plays the hardball to get what needs to get done. That's the only way he succeeds, and that's the only way the Democrats avoid a big defeat in the fall of 2022.
I've been saying, though, I think the 8 years that Joe Biden spent working with and working under Barack Obama have served him incredibly well, not to mention his decades in the Senate. But I'm sure, if we remember, we don't recognize just how close to the financial cliff we were on in 2009 when they came to power. And yes, I disagree slightly with rescuing the banks and the automotive industries, but they also had data that I didn't have. And so they wanted to make sure that America doesn't fall off the financial cliff and drag the rest of the world with it. But I think that there were so many times, I'm sure, that Joe Biden advised President Obama and Obama listened. I think that there are also times that Joe Biden advised President Obama and he didn't listen because he's the number one, Obama is, and Biden was the number two. And that's how relationships work. But I genuinely think that Joe Biden thought about various scenarios of if and when I'm in charge, I will do X. And we find ourselves in a similar economic situation as 2009, but also with the global pandemic. But this time, Joe Biden's in charge. And I think that the 8 years as vice president were really informative. And I think, Lincoln, you sort of alluded to this. I think Joe Biden's much more of a shark than people give him credit for. I think that the compassion that he has shown to the American people is needed, necessary, and imperative in this moment. But if we think about what he just said to his staff, a few hours after being sworn in, saying, if I hear that you don't treat people well, you're gone, right? This is my ship. I am now the captain. And this is how we're going to do things because we have to right this ship. We have to write it quickly. So knowing that Joe Biden has, LBJ is my favorite president, Jimmy Carter is my favorite living president, but I think Joe Biden has more shark in him than he's given credit for. LBJ was like, I'm a shark, swim accordingly. I think Joe Biden's like, oh, well, malarkey, I'm a grandpa, you're my dogs. But I think, Matt, walk us through how a possible impeachment trial in the Senate and a Joe Biden presidency plays out while he's grappling with all the things that you and Lincoln laid out, but also this other piece that would sort of detract for some from this mission of unity and moving forward and grandpa wants what's best for the nation.
I think you outline it well. And I think the one understated fact about Joe Biden is that he's a man that cares about his legacy. And this ascension to the presidency is his ability, whether it's in 4 years or 8, to build his defining legacy and what he has been able to do to the American people. And I think more than anything else, he wants that to be more than an asterisk that he took out Donald Trump. He does not want his legacy to be, I am the guy who beat Donald Trump. It certainly will be an important part of it, but I think he wants to leave something more in terms of what he's been able to accomplish. And I think prior to this run, it was the Affordable Care Act. I think now he has a real opportunity to define what that will be and has a huge opportunity to make it possible. And so I think to Lincoln's point, first and foremost, it's getting us out of this pandemic. It's getting every American vaccinated, and it's restabilizing the economy so that we can go into the years ahead with that growth strategy. But again, I don't think that will be enough for him in terms of his legacy. And for me, it's always been about redefining what our democracy is. I think Joe Biden, given his own personal priorities and frankly, what got him to the presidency, with the voters of South Carolina in particular, and his relationship with Jim Clyburn, he has an opportunity to fundamentally reshape how the American people think about race and think about the implications of race in our democracy. And I think he has a huge opportunity going beyond the Voting Rights Act, to really rebuild our democracy and what it means to be an American, what it means to vote in this country, what it means to be a citizen and to live in a place that is a state and has representation in Congress. That can be his legacy if he decides it can and should be. And I think that is where he gets into the history books. He gets into the history books if not only he's, what moved us on from Donald Trump, but he's the guy who fundamentally built an America that works for everyone and allows equal participation in our democracy.
I think that's key. And, as a white man, to do that and to say some of the things that he has said, I think is also pretty powerful in this moment. Lincoln, we've got about 2 more minutes, but walk us through your thoughts. And also, Joe Biden is very clear that he's a public servant and he works for the American people, is something that we just haven't seen in the last few years.
Serving as Barack Obama's vice president forced Joe Biden, as a white guy born at the right time, to think about race in America different. That experience changed him. Watching Donald Trump as president exposed to him how ugly America can be. That changed him as well. This is a very different person than who became president in 2008. My vision for Joe Biden, if everything goes well, to pick up on a name you mentioned earlier, is he plays LBJ to Barack Obama's Jack Kennedy. Now, fortunately, Barack Obama did not have what happened to Kennedy, didn't happen to Barack Obama. Nonetheless, I think it's pretty clear that Barack Obama is the more charming, charismatic, and better looking of the two. But Joe Biden is a politician, and that may be what America needs right now. Matt said it's his opportunity to kind of reshape this democracy. I would just underscore that is Joe Biden's opportunity. But if that doesn't happen, the future of this country is really imperiled. We cannot go back and forth between authoritarianism and attempts at liberal democracy. That's how democracies collapse. And we are further down that road than we may feel like thinking about on what is this a happy week in many respects.
Gentlemen, I thoroughly enjoy processing these conversations and thinking about the future of our democracy. I will say this conversation, even though I'm still a little wound up, it feels really good to be on the other side of January 20th. I know we have a long road ahead, but I'm glad we made it and we made it together. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Thank you all so much for being here with me. I'm Dr. Christina Greer. You've been watching The Election Show. This episode will air on MNN HD Sundays at 7:30 p.m. and Free Speech TV on Mondays at 7 p.m. As always, we stream live here every Friday on Facebook at 11 a.m. Thanks again for watching The Election Show. Be well.